We all know what streetwear is, but I've been curious about the full extent of the genre's origins. I did some digging and went down a rabbit hole that I'm technically still in, but this is what I found, and that is kind of a disclaimer that this is all the information that I had access to, and that regarding this video, some information is common to others, but not to all. I'm Rebecca, let's get into it. Streetwear is the bastard child of sportswear, American sportswear, and workwear, along with a few other distinct cultural styles. Sportswear is garments, shoes, and accessories that are specifically designed for sports purposes. It has specific functions, thermal properties, comfort, fabric weight, and other properties to suit different sports. Swimming, as an example, has different waterproof and often hydrodynamic materials. In general, sportswear garments have water-resistant function, lycra or spandex to make them stretch with the body, thermal function to keep the body of the athlete warm in cold situations, and cool in warm conditions. An important distinction is that sportswear has specific sports gear, an example polos, sports bras, gym shoes, helmets, sports hats, and leotards. Unlike activewear garments, the flexibility, style, and material are not as varied. It's the level before athleisure wear, and certain activewear garments are used to create athleisure looks. American sportswear arose when women began enjoying leisure activities and it became difficult for America to communicate with Europe during the war. From meeting the needs of these newly active American women, the sportswear that was developed stayed in demand well into the 21st century, where American sportswear became a global phenomenon. In the beginning, sportswear was comprised of coordinate separates that could easily be mixed and matched, such as blouses and shirts, worn with skirts or shorts. In the 40s, McCardle popularized a new way of dressing that included the dirndl skirt. She was well known for her swimsuits, sundresses, wool jersey dinner dresses, and popovers, denim wraparound house dresses. From here, we have the popularization of the collegiate look, also known as Ivy League fashion or style, while Bonnie Cashin was serving separates to provide for the layered look. At the same time, suburbia was influencing fashion. Teenagers didn't leave home without their poodle skirts, twin sets, scarves, Peter Pan collars, blue jeans, leather jackets, bobby socks, and anklets. By the 60s, sportswear became more unisex and denim heavy, which was often worn by anti-war protesters and civil rights protesters. From the 60s and 70s on, we have the introduction of lifestyle brands. Some names you may or may not know include Anne Klein, Calvin Klein, Ralph Lauren, Bill Blass, Joffrey Bean, and Halston, and much later, smack dab in the mid to late 70s was Perry Ellis and technically Willi Smith, who would become the prototype of modern streetwear. So all that to say is that sportswear and American sportswear, along with workwear, are integral to what we know as streetwear today. Long before the word streetwear existed, that's what Willi Smith was creating. Willi went to Parsons on scholarship but wasn't able to finish his degree because the legendary chair of the fashion design department, Ann Keegi, expelled Smith allegedly for having an open affair with another male student. He was shaken by the rejection from the establishment, but emboldened by the teeming life bubbling up from below 14th Street to strike out on his own, according to Willi Smith Archive. Soon after, he began designing for Glenora at the age of 20. Anna Sui also worked there in her younger years. Sui was able to create clothing having a historical bent, made modern by mixing fresh colors and new shapes with vintage elements. 1973 was the beginning of hip-hop, and by this time, there was a look for DJs, lockers, MCs, and b-boys that pulled from sportswear for functionality and American sportswear for style. After college, Willi went on to intern for Arnold Gassy to learn about the inner workings of mainstream high-end fashion and design for Mamie Eisenhower, Barbara and Laura Bush, Diane Carroll, Catherine Deneuve, and assisted in designing for Elizabeth Taylor. Smith later called the pieces he created during this time clothes I didn't want to make, according to Smithsonian Magazine. Digits, an upstart American sportswear venture, is where Willi led the label until he left in 1973. In a New York Times article from 1976, fashion was described as the no-clothes era. People were busy and simply had life to live, reflecting the American sportswear sportswear of the time was basically just everyday wear. You didn't need any leisure activities like when it first started. So this is a pretty functional outfit, and it has minor details to make it more than just a regular boiler suit. Shoes are both clogs, which wouldn't be considered sportswear, but they are comfortable and very functional. Later on, we'll see the use of actual sportswear as we move toward the new millennium, and it's important to note the source of this shift, which is primarily subcultural influences of hip-hop, punk, skate, and a bit of surf. WalkerWear was co-founded in 1976 with co-founder Lori Mallet. Shortly after the brand was founded, they caught Macy's attention and were featured in the front window display. This is where Willi's manifesto, if you would call it, was more evident. Willi designed for everyone. The marginalized, whether it was due to race, economic status, sexual orientation, Willi looked out for the others of the world, being a black queer man himself. An essential part of streetwear in its origins and to this day is democratic design. Willi allowed consumers to make their own decisions with clothing by providing patterns that were easy to remix, adjust size, and add personalization, which is a key aspect of streetwear, along with customization. The purpose of this was to give an option to those who were more intimately connected to fashion, in this case, home sewists. He wanted to provide something for those who look outside of runway trends and give them as much insight to his design process as possible. According to the Smithsonian Magazine in 2021, Alexandra Cunningham Cameron, the Smithsonian's curator of contemporary design, who organized the Willi Smith Street Couture exhibition, says, quote, "He was an activist in a way that other designers of the time were not. I think he was interested in fashion as a tool of equity," end quote. Willi did not consider his work successful unless people on the street were wearing it. Street couture became synonymous with WalkerWear because he did have runway shows along with an accessible price point. Specifically, Street Couture was the name of a 1983 collection. In 1984, Suburban was the title of another collection. Street Couture was used by press and marketers to describe WalkerWear thereafter. The same year, Smith designed costumes for Bill T. Jones, Arnie Zane Dance Company's Secret Pastures at BAM's Next Wave Festival. Keith Haring designed the sets and Peter Gordon composed the music. Smith's other inspirations were photographs of Black life in Harlem, Indian and Senegalese prints, drag balls, his mother and grandmother's style in Philadelphia, where they believed you don't need to be rich to look good. WalkerWear was not cheap, but it was fair. Quote, "Smith was one of the earliest popularizers of streetwear. The ethos behind WalkerWear supported the rise of street style as an alternative to the traditional fashion system. Unlike conventional means of fashion, which prioritized the trickle-down effect and a prescriptive take on trends, streetwear emphasized authenticity and individuality. WalkerWear embodied this. The clothes were adaptable enough that the wearer could project personality onto the pieces and wear them year after year," end quote. Similarly to Telfar making uniforms for the working class, most notably White Castle, Willi made uniforms for the workers who executed the Porth Neuf, where 300 professional workers wrapped Jean Claude's Pont Neuf bridge in polyamide fabric that looked like silk and was the color of golden sandstone on September 22, 1998 in Paris. Smith designed a loose-fitting sky blue smock riffing on the iconic Bleu de Travail French work jacket with matching trousers and blue outfits playing off the tawny champagne of the bridge's ruche material. Oversized pockets hung low, could accommodate fabric samples and informational brochures. Like all of Smith's clothing, it was comfortable and adaptable for wearing with rolled sleeves or high legs or unbuttoned with an undershirt. It was a professionalizing uniform that allowed for maximum individuality. Smithsonian Learning Center. Willi also did costumes for school days in 1988 and is canon as designing Mary Jane's wedding dress and the Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 21, which was released in 1987. Smith was the youngest designer to ever be nominated for the Coty Award in 1971 and won the Coty American Fashion Critics Award for Women's Fashion in 1983. Willi was one of the first designers to create clothing for men and women within the same organization, according to LA Times obituary in 1987. Willi lost his life to AIDS complications, and his brand isn't as well known partly because of his identity and his life was cut short, but also because he was featured in counterculture publications like Paper, according to Alexandra Cunningham Cameron. According to Wikipedia, on November 1989, Mallet hired then up-and-coming designer Andre Young to design the line's fall 1990 collection. Upon its debut in April, the line was panned by critics. To save money, Mallet closed the WalkerWear stores and tried to generate revenue by convincing chain stores to carry the line. Mallett's efforts failed, and in 1990, the women's division of WalkerWear ceased production. Until recently, Willi was lost to history, but was a career starter to creatives like Kim Haystrider, co-founder and former co-editor-in-chief of Paper Magazine, who lived with Willi in the same apartment building in Raleigh, North Carolina. Willi's streetwear prototype had unisex or gender-fluid clothing before it was commonplace, and this is a cornerstone of streetwear that comes in and out as time passes due to male dominance rooted in the subculture streetwear is derived from. He paved the way for streetwear and American sportswear brands and designers like Shane Oliver of Hood by Air, now Anonymous Club, Telfar, Ecoslata, Flemons, and 69. Dapper Dan is often quoted as a luxury streetwear brand, even though he hasn't explicitly referred to his work as so, but the label does make sense considering he was literally making clothing for people deep within street and hip-hop culture, in that order. And it is also safe to say that all of the other brands outside of the prototyping sphere that I'm going to mention would not exist or would be fundamentally different if it was not for Dapper Dan's impact. Dapper Dan was born in 1944, and unlike his mother, who was a fashion illustrator, Dan had no fashion background. He couldn't sew or tailor clothing. Because of his childhood, Dapper Dan knew the value of flyness, and more importantly, when he was younger, he knew that brands did not matter. Growing up poor with holes in his shoes, he learned the importance of having quality clothing, not only for comfort, but for appearances and protection as well. Dapper Dan was a hustler in his own right. Eventually, Mr. Day grew tired of running the streets after witnessing speeches by Malcolm X. Malcolm X once said, "If you want to understand the flower, study the seed." That quote stuck with Dan specifically, and he started going to County Cullen Library and reading about opium and the Boxer Rebellion in China. This is where he connected himself to the problem of addiction globally. Dan then went on to school courtesy of the Urban League and Columbia University. Due to the cultural and political climate of the 1960s, Dan would be influenced by the sense of evolution around the country. Quote, "I personally was involved with the Nation of Islam, the Black Panthers, and an organization called the Mighty Black Zulus, not the Zulu Nation of the Bronx, but a collection of brothers who dressed in black pants, green suspenders, and red shirts. During this time, Dan had given up drinking, smoking, and drug use and became a vegetarian. Dan toured Africa in 1968 as one of the students chosen by the Columbia University Urban League program and returned for the Muhammad Ali George Foreman bout in 1974. The experience changed his life. The art and suits he brought from Nigeria inspired him to bring a clothier to his own neighborhood in Harlem in 1982. Before opening his boutique, Dan began reselling garments from boosters for a profit. Eventually, he had enough to open his boutique, and in the beginning, Dan was particularly interested in leather and fur, but many merchants would not sell to him. Fred Schwartz, aka Fred the Furrier, Harold, and his son Andrew Mark Schwartz of Andrew Mark were the only ones who decided to sell to Dan. Mr. Day began selling Andrew Mark leather jackets with possum lining for $800. A Harlem competitor, AJ Lester, was offering the same good for $1,200, and its representatives demanded that Mr. Schwartz stop supplying the upstart competitor. When Mr. Day and Mr. Schwartz considered a compromise, removing the Andrew Mark label from the jackets inside, Mr. Day had an epiphany about the importance of brands. Quote, "The label is everything," he said. "The label is a thing the gangster clientele use to let the other gangsters in the street know you ain't got what I got. The label or the logo sets you apart." Dapper Dan's luxury boutique became Harlem's go-to along with AJ Lester's. So when one of his first clients came into the store with his lady friend at the time, Dap saw her bag and drew inspiration from it. Something that most people still don't know is that not only did Dan invent the all-over logo or logomania style, but also invented a new process to screen print on leather. All of this work was for the sake of customization, something commonplace with hip-hop that made its way into all market levels of streetwear. Due to this customization, there's a continuation of gender fluidity, since anyone could purchase something, which is an aspect that is lost on later, more popular streetwear brands. The knock-ups Dapper Dan made were not an imitation or a knock-off. First, Dapper Dan ventured to Louis Vuitton to no avail, and then ventured to Gucci, and the father of logomania found what he was looking for. A perfect example of a Dapper Dan piece was reversible, size inclusive, and at the time catered to the lives of his clientele, which included a bulletproof lining and extra deep pockets for firearms. Dan, like many true designers, knew how difficult clothing design is and found excitement in being creative and working through the limitations of the human form. As Dan's business began to grow, many manufacturing businesses began to close and move their operations offshore. During auctions, Dan would always talk about the various machines opinions from the various experts that frequented the auctions. At the same time, the crack epidemic was eating neighborhoods alive, and quote, the Italians were slowly losing their grip on Harlem, and a lot of young guys were moving in because the price of cocaine began to drop. Drugs were and are a curse on places like Harlem, but they created an economy that allowed my business to thrive. The street guys wanted to look good. I was juggling the polarity of Malcolm X and a big-time hustler like Joe Jackson. Being a former street guy myself, I understood what was going on around me. I was in it, but not of it. When hip-hop finally became more lucrative, LL Cool J, Big Daddy Kane, Eric B, and Rakim Salt and Pepper, partially designed by Play of Kid and Play, all adored custom looks from Dapper Dan. During this time, sampling was invented, where artists would take existing music and slice it to create new sounds for original lyrics. Similar to the artist, he created his own samples using the existing logos to create his new and original pieces. Even those who don't follow fashion may remember the infamous Gucci jacket, which was stolen from a Dapper Dan original that originally adorned the Louis Vuitton logo. While Dapper Dan designs did appropriate logos of many fashion houses, the designs were not only original, but often were more expensive than what the houses were producing at the time. Their uniqueness is caused by their function and their role within the streetwear sphere. A decade after opening, Dapper Dan's boutique closed in 1992. After fighting, or rather enduring, many legal battles and insistent raids on his boutique courtesy of the FBI, Dapper Dan was tired and defeated from the constant harassment. The notion that luxury streetwear was solidified by Dapper Dan a couple of years before the shop was forced closed down is especially bittersweet when the likes of Isaac Mizrahi, Charlotte Neuville, and most importantly Chanel have their own hip-hop inspired fashion shows, being huge groundbreaking successes at the time. Even though that what went down on the runway was considered played in hip-hop, quote, the designers are way off the mark, says Fab Five Freddy, star of Yo MTV Raps. These styles don't reflect what's on the street anymore. Newsweek in 1991. Gucci's fall 2018 collection featured a Gucci Dapper Dan capsule that was 80s hip-hop nostalgia personified. He currently has an ongoing collaboration with Gap that began in 2022 in limited edition Dap hoodies that sold out immediately. The collaboration has evolved to an entire capsule, and this is what its most current release looks like for spring 2024. It features 22 denim cowboy inspired looks. Most inspirational, in my opinion, Dapper Dan was able to open a new atelier on Lenox Avenue in 2017 in collaboration with Gucci and Alessandro Michele to a new and possibly old set of clientele by appointment only. I'm going to highlight what was happening in regards to hip-hop and fashion only because the main brands and designers that I'm going to mention were largely inspired by hip-hop during the creation or solidification of their brand. There were a lot more brands that had their part during this time in streetwear, and just because I don't mention them does not mean that they aren't valid and didn't have an impact. The integration of hip-hop into American sportswear, or hip-hop artists beginning to include sportswear like sneakers and jerseys, American sportswear, and workwear into their wardrobes is when the solidification of streetwear begins, even though none of these people are using that word at this point. Run DMC is an iconic rap group known for breaking barriers musically, like with their Aerosmith collaboration, but using the power and reach of hip-hop, they were able to get a record-breaking sponsorship and codify sportswear's place in the streetwear forever. Up until now, sportswear and American sportswear were mostly still strangers. A key to Run DMC's look were their crisp white and black striped Adidas Superstars. Sneakers were also worn more and more by everyday people, especially those who wanted to emulate their favorite sports star or team, like Nike doing shoes with Michael Jordan, as Jordans were quintessential to streetwear as we know it. The mid to late 80s is where we see the emergence of sneaker culture many years before drops or hype. The stereotypes surrounding this way of dress, being denim, gym shoes, or sneakers if you're not from the Midwest, and bomber jackets or hoodies or leather jackets, permeated itself into popular culture, prompting Run DMC to make an entire record about it. At their concert, they asked the full Madison Square Garden to hold up their Adidas, and this specific event resulted in $1 million sponsorship from the brand. It is no coincidence that over 20 years later, when fashion reintroduces itself to hip-hop, these are the exact shoes that had everyone from tech bros to fashion interns in a chokehold. Regarding the American sportswear side, every day, things seem to pique certain hip-hop artists' interest. Footwear is a bountiful scape of many categories, all seemingly are part of modern-day streetwear. Dennis Cole's aka Ghostface Killah, aka Wallaby Kingpin's favorite shoes were Clarks, the mid-ankle shoes specifically. Clark Wallaby Wallabies have a long-standing history propelled by Nathan Clark in 1941. Almost 25 years later and many designs later, Clark's Wallaby was introduced, blending a traditional moccasin, the South African vilskin, and featured a crepe sole and suede upper. The boot was somewhat of a flop in the UK, but found home in Jamaica. The boot was marketed for every day, which is why the Rude Boys of Kingston saw them as the perfect combination of refined British style and rugged reliability. Very similarly to sneakers, in America, a stereotype surrounding their shoes where anyone wearing them was targeted by police. So, in the 80s, during an influx of Jamaican immigration to Brooklyn, an unsuspecting Jizza saw the shoes and propelled hip-hop and streetwear's relationship with Wallabies. Ghostface specifically preferred a customized Wallaby, continuing the significance of customization in streetwear. Clarks were seen as a mix of a dress shoe and a sneaker, making them classy, for the time, yet hard, according to Jizza. Similarly to Clarks, proto-streetwear brands like Digits and WalkerWear took on clogs, a shoe that wasn't a sneaker, but was still comfortable, casual, and more importantly, practical. From this timeline, we can literally see an evolution of sorts of what streetwear is becoming and how it manages to encapsulate a variety of genres to come to the same purpose, which is essentially functional, stylish, culture-based clothing. When searching the inventor of streetwear, there are definitely some definitive results, according to Google. But continuing on that journey, there is no one person who could have possibly completely on their own invented streetwear, and that so many things were happening globally. And then after the brand recap, I'm going to go over the nuances of the genre and the word specifically and how society is reflected in its use. And there's a lot of dot connecting that needs to be done in order to do that, so that will be at the end. First, there was Willi Smith of WalkerWear, and 15 years later, WalkerWear was born. Like many 19-year-old entrepreneurs, April Walker started her business from home in 1986. With funding from small business loans and savings from working in American Express, Walker opened Fashion in Effect in Clinton Hill. Walker hired some of Dapper Dan's tailors to create a range of knockoffs, ready-to-wear, and original designs. This included sweatsuits, denim suits, leather, terry cloth, colorful fabrics, and airbrush pop culture references. The majority of her merchandise was one of a kind. Her business grew through word of mouth via styling services, specifically Audio 2's I Don't Care. In 1998, Walker provided an airbrush shirt of Eric B. and Rakim, attracting a teenage Biggie. Walker had 3 customer types. The first wanted something special but didn't know what they wanted. The second had an idea and wanted to co-create, and the final wanted ready to wear. With WalkerWear, April wanted to create fashion that wasn't out there, designing with her demographic in mind, the demographic being young black and brown men wearing clothes for the concrete jungle, also known as their life, who didn't fit standard sizing and wanted things not found in other labels like larger pockets, bigger sizes, and longer crotch areas. These looks were often styled with Timberlands in a muted or neutral color palette. Eventually, Walker gave birth to the rough and rugged suit that is essentially the zoot suit of the 90s. Walker elevated the button-down jeans combo and made something that was comfy yet club appropriate. Different bodies from muscular, tall, and slim to heavy set were able to wear it. Similarly to Karl Kani, one of the godfathers of streetwear, Walker had an encounter with Tupac in 1992 during the Juice audition. She wore a custom velour sweatsuit and a bucket hat and exchanged her business card. Other notables were Run DMC, Usher, Mike Tyson, and Aaliyah. In order to grow her business, she leveraged young people as a promotional street team and picked 5 stores, an example Dr. J's, Merry-Go-Round, and Macy's, in 5 cities, and people called them constantly. Her first trade show, National Association of Men's Sportswear Buyers, was in an off-site hotel suite in Midtown Manhattan. She sold $300,000 of merchandise. When she went to Magic with Cross Colors and Karl Kani, she got $2 million for her merchandise. There is good and the bad, and Cross Colors collaboration fell through, and WalkerWear declared bankruptcy after she signed with USA Classics. According to Fashion Killer, there was a deal involving And One, a footwear and clothing company specializing in basketball, that didn't work out, and something with Mike Tyson, who may or may not have been involved as well. Walker was by herself and was emotionally over the brand. Quote, "It was very heavy. It was all about the business. Everyone was congratulating me, and I felt like I had a New York showroom, an LA, and a Vegas showroom. I'm traveling all the time. I was over the place. I wasn't being creative." Streetwear, urban wear was becoming oversaturated. Owning 100% of her company didn't help, and being alone in a male-dominated industry caused Walker to close her doors and step away in 1999. Walking away was the best thing she could have done for herself, according to Walker in a Pop Sugar article. Walker returned in 2012 after pursuing various business ventures. Walker's legacy has been captured in programs such as documentary, The Remix, Hip Hop Fashion, 2019, and 50 Years Fly 2023, as well as exhibitions like Women in Streetwear 2020, which he curated for New York City's Port Authority Bus Terminal, Kunsthal Rotterdam, Street Dreams, How Hip Hop Took Over Fashion in 2019, Museum at FIT's Fresh Fly and Fabulous 50 Years of Hip Hop Style in 2023, and Motor Oil Latin American and Latinx Fashion Design Today in 2023. Walker Gems, Get Your Ass Off the Couch encapsulates the knowledge Walker has about the fashion industry and was published in 2017. Walker hopes to make the information even more accessible by creating additional platforms. Carl Williams got his start when he got a jacket and a pair of pants made at the tailor, a Haitian called Jack from Flatbush. His friends thought they were cool, but Williams didn't want to give up his tailor, so he offered to make them for his friends. In 1985, around the age of 16, Williams began designing and making clothing for his friends. From here, he honed in his business acumen and began selling clothes from his car and home around the age of 18. At the age of 19, he learned the value of branding and having a logo, so at the very least people knew what they were wearing. Kani's items were custom, essentially bespoke at this point. Various shirts, jackets, and sweatsuits with leather trim were worn by Heavy D, LL Cool J, and Big Daddy Kane. Taking a cue from other signature lines, Williams contemplated using his government name, but it didn't have the ring of Ralph Lauren, Tommy Hilfiger, or Giorgio Armani. After constantly thinking, can I build a brand, Karl Kani was born. Quote, the only thing that really kept me striving was seeing Black people being successful in the music industry, he said. I wanted to be a part of that, but I knew I couldn't sing or dance or rap. I couldn't do all that, but I could provide clothing for these people who were out there who could make me famous at the same time. From the LA Times in 1994. About a year later, after the branding realization, Kani opened his first store in 1989 in South Central Los Angeles, and it did not go well. With his childhood friend Johnson, Season Sportswear struggled in the Crenshaw district. Manufacturing costs were much cheaper in Los Angeles, and unlike Cross Colors, Kani didn't own his manufacturing. Kani and his team sold $0 of merchandise because of Angelenos that primarily wore khakis, dickies, and had strict rules about gang colors. As a note, this is the environment or coast Stüssy was operating in, and it's interesting that they moved out to New York City in Soho to open their own flagship, but that's for later. The store was closed in 1992 when Cross Colors hired Kani to make his own line for Cross Colors company, Threads for Life. Kani went back to New York City to fundraise, and the store was unfortunately held at gunpoint and robbed blind. In order to raise money, Kani turned to guerrilla promotion and taking out ads in Word Up and Right On for $1,000 apiece. Kani's number was placed in the ads, and their targets would indeed call said number. Eventually, this resulted in Karl Kani being stocked in local retailers in DC, like Up Against the Wall, via the request of kids who supported the brand. Taking that lesson from marketing, Kani put his own image on the label, giving representation and a sense of community for Black and brown young people who wore his clothing. Just like his predecessors, Kani's items were well made with a price that reflected the quality. Quote, Kani's clothing does not come cheap, as the outfit he wore during a recent interview, motorcycle boots $130, cream colored baggy twill pants $75, and a virgin wool shirt $150 attest. But Kani makes no excuses. You can't have good quality and low prices, he said, adding that he may soon come out with a lower price offshoot like Ralph Lauren has done with his Chaps brand of clothing. LA Times in 1994. By 1993, the late Tupac Shakur became the ad hoc creative director for the 1993 campaign and face of the brand. Ad hoc is for this or for this situation, so a lot of that work was small, non-repeating projects for his time in the role. Of all the collaborations, shoutouts, and sponsors, Tupac is especially interesting because he didn't charge Kani anything. Tupac supported urban streetwear specifically and saw the value in providing resources for his community and promoting creativity in all its forms. Going forward, Kani's journey was something of a roller coaster. He got shoutouts that many streetwear brands at the time were accustomed to, and his clothing will further be immortalized on the cover of Aaliyah's debut album. As flowery as the fashion industry can be, it's still an industry, and in 1990, the same year of all the success and acclaim, Merry-Go-Round filed for bankruptcy protection, who was Kani's biggest retail partner at the time. In 1996, Skechers sold 1.4 million common shares of Karl Kani in an IPO, and Kani was required to relinquish ownership of his name to Greenberg, who co-founded Skechers. Kani couldn't sign away what was now a part of his identity, so he hired Ralph Lauren's attorneys and eventually signed an agreement that resulted in Kani paying $10 million in installments. After a decade, he was debt-free. Karl Kani is now estimated as a billion-dollar brand, having 10 flagships in Japan and regarded as a household name in Europe. The parallels between prototype and emerging streetwear brands continues in Cross Colors. Karl Jones gained design experience from studying at Otis Parsons School of Design and Trade Tech schools, but eventually dropped out and started a screen printing business where he had clients like Guess. At his screen printing business, Jones would meet the other half of Cross Colors, Thomas Walker, who attended Meridian Community College, got an associate's degree, and went on to get a bachelor's of fine arts from Delta State University, then a master's of fine arts from Louisiana Tech, and went on to work as a graphic designer at said screen printing company. Jones would eventually start a clothing brand in 1985 called Surf Fetish with Moroccan-born French-Canadian garment manufacturer named Orly Dahan. Surf Fetish was a beachwear brand that turned into a skatewear brand, and its final form took on WalkerWear. In 1989, Jones, Walker, and Dahan became interested in ethnic clothing after Bobby Brown's Every Little Step video blew up, and they created their own version of harem pants in another brand called Fetish Blues. Merry-Go-Round ordered several $1 million in merchandise. Their interest of harem pants silhouette led Jones and Walker to venture to New York City and LA. They looked at Spike's joint stores created by filmmaker Spike Lee, which sold clothing and movie souvenirs. Walker even designed the label for Lee's line of clothes. According to Dahan, Jones's understanding of his ethnicity and race came to a head. In 1990, with Walker, Jones split from what would later be called Fetish Group and set out to something he resonated with. An interesting quote from Dahan about Jones is, "I thought it was a great idea. He saw the opportunity and did what he had to do. He lived his clothing. There was no blacker person in the world when he was doing Cross Colors than Karl Jones," he says. "There was no whiter person than him when he was doing surf." This says a lot about Jones, but even more about the association society has regarding race and subcultures, regardless of either's cultural origins. Cross Colors got its name because they both decided to create something for those who liked hip-hop. Cross Culture was the first name, but they couldn't use that, so Cross Colors was used and was based on the movie Colors that depicted gang life. They wanted gang culture to feel represented, to embody unity by uniting the colors. In New York City, they saw kids wearing huge belted baggy pants, size 38 on a size 30 person, quote, only in New York, very much oversized. Now they wear them kind of fitted and sagging, but then it was just oversized, and they automatically sagged because it was so big that all the fabric from the waist just bunched up. It was size 40 belted, and we were like, what is that? If that's happening, we can take that block. We were manufacturers, we were graphic artists. We said, we'll take that fit, and we'll bring the waist into a fitted, but we'll keep the silhouette. A large, we're gonna spec it as a medium. Let's do everything oversized. We came back, we had our spec in our hand. TJ had the drawings and the colors, and the kente cloth, and the bodies and the jackets. We began to make patterns. Our fit, our fabric, wash our fabric, dye our fabric, and it took us about 3 months. Karl Jones from the Hundreds, 2014. The core colors were green, yellow, and red, which stood for the land, sun, and blood of the people respectively. Cross Colors legacy would make TJ and Jones culture heroes. Something that solidified Cross Colors and their design aesthetic into American fashion and fashion history in general was when Fresh Prince wore their stuff after it was physically brought to Will Smith, who luckily loved everything. Without being aware of the promoting and branding they were doing, the duo got pieces to in living color as well. After wearing Cross Colors on air, record companies began sending their artists to the brand. Those artists were Tupac, TLC, Snoop Dogg, Mary J. Blige, Aaliyah, Big Daddy Kane, Queen Latifah, and Kris Kross. They both managed marketing, oversaw sales, and prepared for the 1990 Magic Trade Show that further exposed them to the entertainment industry. I'm not going to go into super specifics because they're important for later, but this show resulted in almost $8 to $12 million of orders, something they were surprised about. Jones had spent $300,000 of his own money, and the booth they had was designed with corrugated metal and had graffiti on casters. As the company grew to about 75 employees, the actual business would emulate the cornerstone of streetwear, which is community. This isn't to say things weren't difficult at times or completely utopian, but regarding people's experiences, it was very stressful, but ultimately the best work experiences of their lives. Women were in positions of power, and they had to pay to reflect it. Inner city teenagers who promised to wean themselves from drugs and gangs were hired. At the end of 1991, Spike Lee, a former client, sued the company, and they had to change their name to Threats for Life after settling out of court. The same year, they surpassed WalkerWear as the largest African-American owned business in the industry. Karl Kani was working out of Cross Colors headquarters at the time. The settlement hurt sales since only 150 $50,000 could be used in a limited time. Some were destroyed, but it also massively overproduced garments just to use up the labels, says Palmer, who by that time was Cross Color's vice president of production. As a result, retailers for the first time began to return the company's clothes. It took 8 years for the brand to get fully off the ground, and in 6 years the company was sold. Quote, failures are common in the apparel industry, but not as high profile as this, says Eric Wakal, a former merchandise manager for Merry-Go-Round, not with these extremes of success and failure. At the same show, a new aesthetic for the brand was being presented to reflect the sophistication of the times. There were no more bright colors, baggy clothes, and earth tones were presented as well. Salespeople at the show didn't know how to sell the items, and the entire vibe was off. An example, the music, which was a lot of acid jazz, and A Tribe Called Quest, which is quoted in this article as soft boy rap. Bacall was disappointed specifically because he gotten used to ordering twice as much product. In the summer of 1993, Merry-Go-Round was responsible for 60% of Cross Color's revenue as they were sliding closer to Chapter 11 and Cross Colors began laying people off. Karl Kani, who was making $68 million annually in 1983, even had a comment. Now, as Cross Color's competitor, depending on who you ask, their successor, you need to be out there seeing what's happening, telling people what's happening. Kani pauses to inspect his toothpick. People from the streets say Carl Jones ain't down no more. Cross Colors wasn't being featured in magazines like Vibe anymore. In defending the new aesthetic, Jones says, the line is still urban because that's where it comes from. Jones says, it's cleaner, the color's calmer, more natural. The line looks more rugged, and it's a little more expensive than yesterday's. The urban market would never get a real chance to decide on how they felt about the new pieces because buyers simply weren't into what Jones and Walker were selling. However, in 1994, Fortune magazine wrote that Jones and Walker were among America's smartest young entrepreneurs. Also, in the same LA Times article I was getting the Karl Kani information from, he was doing the same thing with giving more neutrals and slimmer silhouettes, something that was just happening in fashion in general in the 90s. In 3 years, as of 1994, a company that captured the imagination of the industry and embodied the best hopes of a community went from startup to $80 million in sales to liquidation. This is something they never really recovered from. In 2014, during the first wave of the hip-hop streetwear revival that was also propelled by thrifting becoming popular, resulting in people dressing like it was the 80s and 90s, consumers were asking for Cross Colors en masse for the first time in over 30 years. In 2016, Walker and Jones repurchased the brand after Cardi B and Bruno Mars wore them in the Finesse music video and in the 2018 Grammy Awards to perform. Karma Loop, who I'm so happy is still in business, and Zoomies carried the brand as me writing the script for this June 10th, 2024. Also, in this new wave, there was a collab with Billie Eilish and a Tupac estate, apparently, I believe, that involved new interpretations of iconic styles in a television segment. Cross Colors Black Fashion in the 20th Century was a California African American museum exhibition that paid homage to Jones and Walker's creation in 2020. And it was the first of a 5-part exhibition that examined fashion, identity, and visual art. In 2021, the urban wear brand had a collab with Nordstrom Cross Colors, Nordstrom Center Stage, which was a pop-up that showcased archival pieces and imagery from their 30-year history, according to Women's Wear Daily. A few times on our brand journey, I've mentioned the name Sean Stüssy, who is coined as having surf origins, which the creator 100% does. But the brand itself, out of any other brand that is mentioned, has the most varied influences of subcultures. So let's get into the surf part of the origin specifically, considering that that is how the brand largely got started. Before the brand's incorporation in 1984 and 1965, Sean took up surfing at the age of 10. 3 years later, he started shaping, and 2 years after that, he was hired by a surfboard manufacturer in Laguna Beach, and until 1979, he did that along with ski instructing during the winter at Mammoth Mountain. In the 60s, as far as countercultures went, surfing was the ultimate in California. However, by the time Sean started creating his boards, that's what he was rebelling against during the time of the Vietnam War and didn't want to be your post-war parents' generation. Before, in the 60s and 70s, logos were ovals, Dewey Weber, and Greg Knoll style graphics. Sean moved back to Laguna Beach for regular work, and in the same year of 1979, he started his famous scribble. In subculture, during the time, that was abnormal, and Sean's Australian friends thought he was an egomaniac, his friends being hippie guys, according to Sean. Around this time, he was more punk, being inspired by the Sex Pistols since 1977, but in more recent interviews admits to being behind compared to the base areas of these subcultures. Sean's boards had heavy airbrushing and punk rock, The Clash, hip hop, reggae, new wave graphics, and lots of color that would seep into his clothing design. A Japanese surfboard manufacturer offered Sean the opportunity to observe and study aquatic jewels. Quote, these trips to Japan became a way for the Californian to get a glimpse of high fashion, to beat the trendy stores in Tokyo, to assimilate trends and aesthetic taste, according to Athleta. In 1982 or 83, there was a trade show called Action Sports TV, primarily for the boards, where he brought clothing items. Over the span of 3 days, 1,000 of those t-shirts were not for sale, but they all sold out anyway, along with 24 boards. I have the logo screen printed on t-shirts and sweatshirts, but it had nothing to do with producing clothes. I was trying to promote the boards. The next trade show, Sean brought shorts that were more punky as opposed to the little cord OP shorts everyone was wearing. Sean went back to the trade show 6 months later with more t-shirts, but the buyers wanted the shorts. Sean has said at some version in multiple interviews that he didn't have a real job and didn't really want one, which is what will determine his actions regarding the business once it's established. Frank Sinatra Jr. served with Sean as a teen and was an accountant and possessed the business expertise Sean lacked. Sinatra used $5,000 of his own money to become Sean's partner in 1983. In 1984 or 85, depends on the source, Stüssy was incorporated. In 1986, the company registered trademark to the U.S., which resulted in a market for vintage Stüssy designs. Everyone who was in the company had 2 jobs until they didn't have to. Sean designed his boards for the bros, not the pros, and along with not wanting a real job mindset, he essentially got no inspiration from the surf world regarding the apparel side of the business. Sean immersed himself in hip-hop and club culture. In 1988, the brand was introduced to Europe, which was a huge success. It was carried in surf shops and upscale stores in England, Australia, and Japan. By this time, they were doing $5 million in annual sales. In Japan, the cool kids were wearing painters' hats, which were a great vehicle for fashion. The big old S6-panel snapback was all wool and didn't say Stüssy, but has Stüssy script on the back. The double S wasn't necessarily inspired by Chanel in an aspirational way, but more in a satirical way, but also to place the brand in the same established light for their customers. It was more identifiable as a logo as opposed to an all-over print. This is why I mentioned Dapper Dan, because before him, Chanel wasn't really using their logos in that manner. It was still quite subtle and certainly not so conspicuous. Observing the Chanel logo, it's primarily applied on accessories, trimmings, and bags, but no one was a human equivalent of a billboard. Going back to Stüssy, it was the first brand to offer a baseball cap as an accessory, though many had been accessorizing with them for decades at this point. This grew to about 20% of their total business by the late 80s. Sean was designing wearable classics and described his look as prep meets punky meets b-boy, as in Beach Boy. Union NYC opened in 1989 by James Shabia, who would go on to found Supreme with then partner Mary Ann Fusco, that was mainly filled with nice British brand. When Union was able to stock Stüssy, it would always sell out. By 1990, annual sales had reached $17 million, and the following year they increased to $24 million. The same year, in 1991, Stüssy moved to New York to open the Soho store that James helped open and manage until 1994. The move was prompted by the brand's influences, which were Carhartt, Timberlands, M65, hip hop, clubbing, The Clash, Big Audio Dynamite, Beastie Boys, and Run DMC. Streetwear is closely tied with hip hop and rap music, and New York is the birthplace of streetwear that many think of when the genre is brought up. Sean went to New York to meet people, and that's what flipped his take on things. Hip hop was seen as more aspirational, and skate, surf, and punk style was seemingly more attainable, and Sean used them all as cultural references. The brand's design inspiration evolution is this: beachwear to skatewear to work clothes or surplus to preppy and hip hop, all equating to what would be called contemporary street fashion. While Stüssy, Kani, and Cross Colors all moved to New York to advance their designs and businesses, streetwear brand X Large stayed right in California. X Large also opened their first store in 1991 in LA on Vermont Street and sold vintage and new gear. Mike D of Beastie Boys, Eli Boners, and Adam Silverman eventually realized it was cheaper to stock new X Large merch than vintage footwear. They did knockoffs of stuff they liked on cotton instead of polyester. Before the store opened, Eli Boners proposed to his college roommate Adam Silverman, a board architect, about the idea, and Eli got startup money from his dad. Adam met Mike D at a dog park and got his investments, and a lot of popularity came to the brand because of the public's assumption that a member of the Beastie Boys owned or had some stake in the company. According to Phat magazine in 1994 interview with E, Mike D explained the X-Large style, saying, "The whole essence of b-boy fashion, hip-hop fashion, is pioneering something, innovating something. You might take a golf visor that only people over the age of 60 are going to buy at a golf shop, and if you're able to carry that off, then you pioneer it right there." X-Large catered to counterculture community, providing an intersection of skateboarding, music, design, art, and graffiti using humor, wit, and sarcasm. The logo was inspired by tagging West Coast style graffiti and primarily Ben Davis, a San Francisco workwear brand. The Ben Davis logo was an ape, and X-Large adopted it supposedly before Bape and every other streetwear label. Millions of Gorillas by Steven Giancos is what inspired the original logo or original gorilla. Quote, "The fattest type that we could find with the kerning super tight, it looked super fat," is how Eli describes the logo. As the 90s progressed, so did the brand, from t-shirts to bottoms, outerwear, accessories, and they worked with printers in the surf and skate industry to do their prints that included strange print placements with offbeat colors and inks. The same year, they opened a second store in Tokyo. The following year, in 1993, they opened a second US store in New York City, and in 1994, X-Girl opened in New York City. From here, many international stores were opened. In 1994, there was the X-Fucked collab, which was one of the first streetwear collaborations during a time where brands were few and everyone knew each other, but not everyone got along. By 1995, they had over 15 employees and did fun things, having a fashion show for dogs from 1996 to 1997. In 1996, X-Large produced a collection of business suits they called the Action Suit. A campaign was created featuring John C. Reilly doing various activities in said suit that resulted in a strange but comedic promotional video that truly embodied what X-Large was about. In 1999, they had an 8th anniversary re-release of the most popular designers of the company's past. In 2008, Eli sold the company to their Japanese distributor, Bees International, and the next year they focused on Japan's domestic market. X-Large's first location in Los Feliz closed after 22 years of operation. According to Eli, the brand played true to the player, not the game, which explained some of the funner ideas like the dog fashion show. The international Stüssy tribe was essentially a group of Sean's peers that included official members of disc jockeys, musicians, and artists, along with unofficial members that were drawn in by the basic human instinct to belong to a clique. This allowed Sean to avoid any real advertising and giving away merch to celebrities for promotion. Sean created varsity jackets out in London, including names of each individual, the Stüssy logo, and the word staff embroidered on them. Sean felt that by making more things, he was giving back to his community. Alex Turnbull, aka Alex Baby, was a UK-based DJ, and that was the beginning of friends and family that would make the international Stüssy tribe. The group expanded to many others, including Hiroshi Fujiwara, Mick Jones of The Clash, Keith Haring, and Matthew Williams, founder of Aleeks, and previous creative director at Givenchy, who says Stüssy is the first brand he became aware of outside of traditional American sportswear brands. The brand continued to grow. In 1992, they opened their first store in Tokyo and another store in LA on La Brea Avenue. The capsule women's line Stüssy Sister Gear was produced under their first Australian license in 1992. By spring 1993, clothing was only available in Stüssy boutiques. By 1995-ish, annual sales were $35 million, which was satisfactory to Sean and Frank Sinatra. At the same time, rumors were circulating that Sean was leaving, and in 1996, he officially left the company, with Sinatra eventually buying out his partner's shares of the company. James Jabia started Supreme 2 years earlier. Sean stayed on as a consultant and operated the New York and LA boutiques. Desire is to enjoy life and be free of pressures of running business day to day. Sean wanted to spend more time with his wife and son. After Sean's departure, the company continued to operate at $35 million in annual revenue. In 2000, they began sponsoring a few skateboarders to help strengthen the brand. They chose skate because of its accessibility compared to surf, which was more niche and more distant from streetwear as a whole. Richard Mulder was the first skater who unofficially joined in 1999 and was joined by Keith Huffnagel, who would go on to found Huff, Danny Montoya, Scott Johnson, and Chad Turnham. The next group included Anthony Van Egelen, Justin Eldridge, Justin Reynolds, and Danny Supa. In 2001, the first dunk with Nike and the ostrich for the black sneaker and the snakeskin swoosh for the brown sneaker, which Frank gives credit to James Jebbia for. The collaboration resulting in 3,000 to 5,000 pairs being sold worldwide exclusively in Stüssy Stüssy stores. This is where we see sneakers continuing to legitimize street culture to a broad audience. The skate sponsorship stopped completely in 2005 or 6 because the brand ultimately wasn't trying to cater to the skate community and wasn't making apparel or accessories to specifically skate in. The hypebeast model was also a factor in Stüssy's success post-Sean. It didn't affect the industry in a negative way, but did take a hit on creativity and made everything more commercial. Sean didn't see the brand going in the direction it did. APC, Comme des Garçons, Yohji Yamamoto is what he wanted it to be, not necessarily regarding design or aesthetic, but the sophistication those brands have. On top of the 24-hour workdays and not seeing the end of the rainbow, caused Sean and other members of the brand to be on completely different pages. As of 2024, Stüssy has had a whirlwind of a revival and has somewhat surpassed Supreme regarding design and just as a brand, depending on who you ask. Around 2020 or 2021, I actually took notice of their stuff on Good Hood store specifically. They also have been doing so many collaborations, too many to name, which is ironic considering Sean's praise of Supreme in a 2013 interview and his attitude towards Stüssy in the same interview. It seems like Stüssy is now a lot closer to what he wanted it to be, what he was trying to convince the other members to do before he left the brand, aside of course from all of the re-releases of Sean's original work. Therein lies the problem, the always lame re-release. My designs were meant for the moment of which they were created, and to have a vintage piece that still speaks to you is what it's all about, not making more new ones for the money grab. Go out and find the vintage one that tugs at your heart and shows you have more invested in the game than the reissue from the sales rack. Debo and a group of guys around the world get this, and I'm very proud that they do. Just saying. S Double, which was officially released in 2010 according to High Snobiety, whose name is inspired by hip-hop, where his wife would always call him S Double, specifically because of a song by Eric and Parrish making dollars in 1990. Eric was ERRICK. S Double is a globally recognized brand and is just Sean doing what he wants to do with slow growth. As of 2024, there's been an S Double revival over Sean has come out of retirement to resume the brand, partnering with skatewear brand Globe, founders and siblings Matt Peter and Stephen Hill. A comeback collection should be released, and this is me guessing, by 2025 at the latest. Like always, he doesn't want to do any heavy lifting, be in any big department stores, or get too big because buyers being in huge stores and focusing too much on revenue is always the beginning of the end. Earlier, I briefly mentioned Ivy League dress and its part in American sportswear. And when the calculated preppy style was surging through Britain and America, Japanese men specifically created their own version that was even more preppy and calculated than the original. Take Ivy tells you all about that, along with a 7-chapter podcast special from Articles of Interest. Hiroshi Fujiwara has been dubbed the godfather of Japanese streetwear, and with a few other notable names, birthed the essential and specific Japanese street style you may know and love. As an older teenager, Fujiwara went to Tokyo to see his sisters and friends who worked in fashion. During this time, Fujiwara was inspired by punk rock, psychedelic rock, or anything from British rock and roll, and believed fashion and music belonged together. Around 1982 or 83, Fujiwara wanted to get away from the strictness and business of Japan. After being in London, Fujiwara was surprised to find that a similar strictness would be found there. He felt like everyone was a slave to old people in London and that it was flat. From there, Fujiwara wanted to connect those in and out of authority positions. McLaren told Fujiwara to go to New York City for hip-hop because London was boring now. From here, Fujiwara transported culture from London to Manhattan to Tokyo. At the Roxy in New York, Fujiwara would listen to Africa Islam and Cool Lady Blue and became interested in the DJ side of hip-hop. In London, Hitomi Okawa of Milk and the godmother of Japanese streetwear, John Maybury, Stephen Jones, David Ola, Boy George, Marilyn, a new romantic pop singer, and Jeremy Healy were part of the community that Fujiwara was greatly impacted by. In Japan, DJing quickly became popular because the profession wasn't responsible for their mixes, the club was, and DJs were basically bartenders. With his experimentation, Fujiwara helped popularize the genre in Japan. Around 1985, skaters, according to Fujiwara, didn't have influence from hip-hop, and 2 years later that would change around the time Stüssy was becoming more established and Fujiwara would buy the brand from Patricia Fields when visiting New York. Around this time, Fujiwara also became a columnist for Popeye magazine, which was founded in 1976 by Tokyo-based Magazine House. It was the first fashion and lifestyle magazine to be published in Japan that targets young Japanese men according to National Day calendar. While living with Vivian Westwood and Malcolm McLaren, McLaren would call Fujiwara Tiny Punk. Fujiwara uses as inspiration to create tiny punks with one of Japan's legendary musicians, DJ, producer, Kan Takagi. The duo didn't want to use their real names, so Fujiwara's nickname was used as the stage name. The duo added their own twist and made the A in Tiny Panks, which is another version of the name, the anarchism mark. The duo had primarily punk influence, but was able to mix that with American and Japanese hip-hop. The duo often wore punk outfits with Adidas superstars. A year after forming, Tiny Punks released their first music on the album Construction, which was released as a joint album with Seiko Ito. The Tiny Punks name, which changed from Tiny Panks Organization, TPO, Tiny Punks, Tiny Panks, Tiny Punks, and TPO, depending on the release. The group opened for the Beastie Boys in Tokyo and co-founded Japan's first hip-hop label, Major Force. Their magazine column last was featured in Takarajima, a subcultural magazine that featured the best new stuff from street culture, new rap, punk albums, films, skateboarding gear, and DJ equipment. The publication was expanded to video scenes on late-night Japanese TV. The duo would go on to release a number of singles, last being one of them, and would disband around 1990. In 1996, Tiny Punks would unite again to release their comeback single, Yestermorrow. Tokyo youth were eager for a new cultural wave of neighboring Shibuya district, which was home of the Americana-centric Shibukaji subculture that was adopted as a form of self-expression. Bigger companies like Comme des Garçons were following Europe, not copying, but they did follow fashion in France. Good Enough was founded in 1990 and was a fledgling graphic t-shirt label where Shinichiro Nakamura, graphic designer and later founder of Skate Thing, collaborated with Fujiwara on the t-shirts. Notable aspects of the brand were the G logo and racism tee, and brand collaborations with More About Less, Finesse, and Yoshida & Co. Porter label. Brands collaborated with each other, some having sublines, sharing graphics and ideologies. This preceded the entire Ura Harajuku or Hidden Harajuku movement that started in 1990. Along with Stüssy, Good Enough's other inspiration was Anarchic Adjustment. Anarchic Adjustment was founded in 1986 by Rad or Read and Destroy magazine that was founded by Nick Phillip. The brand gained popularity thanks to Ozone Freestyle Bicycle Company, which was pivotal to the 80s BMX scene. Owner and designer Alan Brown and Charles Uzel Edwards, an artist known as Pure Evil. Cut and paste style graphic prints, Akira bootleg graphics, and subliminal messages define the brand style and design aesthetic. In Japan, it became cult-like due to Joy Ho and Alan Brown opening 2 stores in Tokyo in 1994 and an American Village Parco store in Osaka that were endorsed by Hiroshi and DJ Tawate. Nick was an outsider making clothes for outsiders and was immersed in street culture without identifying with a single movement. Since Nick only wanted to follow his feelings, it resulted in an inevitable success into a slow decline of the brand operation in the fashion system. With the aesthetics from surf and skate, BMX, and Fujiwara's hip-hop, Good Enough had a palatable aesthetic packaged for budding Japanese taste in streetwear, according to Hypebeast in 2016. Good Enough's items were expensive and rivaled the price of Western designer goods, similarly to Dapper Dance Creations. Elevated basic items via the price point were sold in limited drops and sold out in a day, which is a characteristic of the modern global streetwear market. Fujiwara wanted to remain anonymous because he believed that only people like him would buy it and wouldn't see the clothes for what they were. In 1994, Fujiwara would found Electric Cottage, named by Sean Stüssy. Electric Cottage had a pivotal role in defining Urahara style and was the original holder of the infamous Thunderbolt currently seen in Fragment Design products and projects. The first time Good Enough closed, it was for half a year in 1995, where Fujiwara limited stock to 10 stores that his friends operated. If we continue like this, our brand value will decrease. Most recently, there was a stateside collection with Undefeated. Good Enough officially ended in 2017. Along with Good Enough, Fujiwara's fashion legacy expands to the boutique Nowhere. April 1st, 1983, the store was opened with 400,000 Japanese yen, which is about $4,000 in 2016, and today it's $2,500. The title is based off of Nowhere Man by the Beatles and from a phrase from the Sex Pistols artwork. Nowhere was nestled between Harajuku and Aoyama and categorized as back alleys and side streets. Nowhere carried 40% Against Rights, started by founder of Skate Thing and Double Taps, that was established in 1996, Tetsu Nishiyama, or Tet, and Anarchy Forever Forever Anarchy. Most notable, Nowhere was the first to carry Bait by Tomoki Nagao aka Nigo Hiroshi II and Undercover by Jun Junio Takahashi, who along with Fujiwara's help opened Nowhere. Nigo and Takahashi studied at Tokyo's Bunka Fashion College. While Nigo was Fuji's assistant, he started the last 2 column for Phat magazine, which he began writing for in 1990. Undercover was half of the store's merchandise and the other half being Nigo's side, comprised of sneakers and vintage items, but people mostly went to Takahashi's side. After watching the 5-hour Planet of the Apes marathon, Nigo came up with the original ape face concept and the name A Bathing Ape in Lukewarm Water. Nigo took the first part of the name and started making small runs in a style referencing vintage American style. The last 3 column in a Science magazine was used for self-promotion, and Nigo aligned himself with the growing hip-hop scene to differentiate Bape from other labels. Through classic cosigns and rap groups, the brand gained traction and popularity. As collectors of sedentaries, Vivienne Westwood's 70s punk rock fashion line with Malcolm McLaren, Fujiwara and Takahashi was lead singer of the Tokyo Sex Pistols, founded Anarchy Forever Forever Anarchy in 1994. Fujiwara and Takahashi stopped working on it in the 2010s, the rarest item being a customized bomber done by the duo in the early 90s. Alpha never achieved mainstream success. Urahara Juku or Hidden Harajuku is where Urahara K or Urahara style was originated. Its uniform of American casual items thoughtfully put together, composed of crisp, screen-printed brand tees, camo jackets, dark denim, and striped skater tees paired with high-tech backpacks. The same American style that was popular there is still defining what streetwear is today. An emphasis on strong storytelling and subcultural references was key for this style as well. The style that Fujiwara brought to Japan, the world, would extend decades into the future, inspiring the aesthetics of what is known as the last street culture. Nowhere moved from Harajuku to Aoyama and closed entirely in 2000. A temporary Nowhere opened in Hong Kong in 2009, carrying reproductions of Last 2. Post Good Enough and Nowhere, Fujiwara has continued to work on projects and collaborations versus having his own brand. Similarly to Sean, Fujiwara didn't want to be super hammered down by business. He doesn't consider himself a designer, but a creative. As an example, Virgil Abloh didn't consider himself a designer in the same way Fujiwara doesn't. Fujiwara did consider Abloh a designer because he can make so many things for so many people. An example of Fujiwara's creative lifestyle are the collaborations he's done with Nike. The HTM Air Force Ones were all released in 2002 from the collaboration between Hiroshi Fujiwara, Tinker Hatfield, and Mark Parker. The Air Mock Mid, Air Woven, Zoom Macropus were all part of Fujiwara's HTM creative consultant portfolio. Fujiwara is still consulting today through Fragment Design that was mentioned earlier. Everything is a partnership with Fragment Design, and it isn't a brand that actually makes anything. Fragment started when Fujiwara left Good Enough in the late 1990s. Fragment celebrated its 20th anniversary in 2023, and through the years, Fujiwara's stamp on streetwear specifically has aided in Fragment's success. For 20 years, Fragment has given people the opportunity to buy into Fujiwara's taste without Fujiwara having to actually produce anything at all. Getting into the more nuanced aspects of streetwear, you may or may not have noticed that there is a lack of women mentioned. Milk by Hitomi Yokoyama, Willi Wear Hysteric Glamour, founded by Nobiko Nobu Kitamura in Japan. Cross Colors women's line, the Stüssy Sister Gear Capsule, which was co-designed by Felicity Rulikowski. X-Largest X-Girl was founded by Kim Gordon of Sonic Youth with Daisy Von Firth, were the only entities during the inception of streetwear as we know it today who didn't exclusively or primarily cater to men. Not having a space for women in a category like streetwear, even though they do exist and often have to resort to being in limbo with wearing men's clothes with men's sizing or being dissatisfied with what's being offered in the mainstream women's brands, is a disservice that is still negatively affecting streetwear today. To be fair, streetwear was first created for men by men, and I think that this article kind of says it best, that this is kind of like the mindset around it. In many ways, it does operate outside of the traditional fashion system, but regarding operating outside of society as a whole, it still didn't do that. And if anything, the way that it operates regarding women kind of enforces all of those values that it seems like it would have kind of gone against. And I use Baby Phat as an example specifically because on the Reddits that I looked at to kind of help form this, they were saying that that wasn't real streetwear, even though a lot of the inspirations are the same. It's just that it is fitted to a different body, isn't a man's body, and catered to people that don't necessarily want baggier silhouettes. And if you look even further into the kind of clothing that Baby Phat would design, traditional brands, designers, fashion looks down on that type of dress as well. It is still considered considered outside of the fashion system, not only in regard to the way that it looks, but also regarding the perceptions that it brings onto the wearer. Earlier I mentioned Run DMC and the Rude Boys of Kingston. The way that they dressed automatically said, okay, you're up to no good. It's the same thing with that kind of dress. It's just from a very specific lens that seemingly only women can experience because of their body type and the way that they choose to adorn it. Due to what has been the current perception of streetwear, the time period and what is considered as counterculture in that time has more to do with what is actually streetwear or street fashion, and that is where the nuances of the word streetwear come into play. So regarding the word streetwear, there's a generally negative feeling toward it from the pioneers. Streetwear was actually first seen in Vision Streetwear in 1976, and it was founded by Brad Dorfman, who believed that skateboarding could change the world, create a cultural shift, and enable a movement, and saw an opportunity to, for lack of a better word, exploit that. The brand went bankrupt in the 80s. The following quotes from the Stüssy team are all from Complexes and Oral History of Stüssy Part 1 and 2. Frank Sinatra says, some believe anything that isn't surf or skate is streetwear brand. That isn't true. Eddie Cruz, manager at Union, owner of Stüssy Los Angeles chapter and founder of Undefeated, says, someone made that up. I wish they hadn't. Jules Gayton, the original Stüssy tribe member and DJ, says, I kind of hate that term. Nick Bowers, Stüssy designer, says, I think it's a good term. What you wear in the street when you're not doing your sport. Jules of Stüssy said something particularly ironic. It's really corny brands that are at Magic for a couple of times, then they're gone. Remember that earlier I said Cross Colors would bring what would be called streetwear to the Magic show? Cross Colors was the first to bring streetwear to the show, but the word came later as streetwear. Urban sportswear became more popular and lucrative, which didn't take long considering its starting point. Those who showed at Magic had this label forced on them, and it's been used ever since. April Walker has an interesting quote about this in InStyle. Back in the early 90s, the Magic Fashion Trade Show had this section called Streetwear, and it was an intersection of Janko Jeans meets Mossimo meets some of the urban brands. Then urban, which is code for the word black to me, got bigger, and then around 2000, we started seeing brands, even Supreme, which began as a skate and surf kind of brand, start expanding their base intentionally to cater to that market. Urban fashion and streetwear are the same damn thing. It just expanded the narrative globally and tried to reframe and remove the original starting point of how this began. Virgil Abloh having to explicitly state that he isn't streetwear. He said that this is a luxury brand and he's going to leave it at that. Shane Oliver and Telfar Clemens both have a history, the streetwear moniker being slapped onto the word. Oliver saying it's lazy and Clemens making a great point because of their own identity. Fashion assumes the clothing is streetwear, which Clemens said would be fine if the industry actually did its due diligence to see what was being created. The word as we know it today was literally birthed from a corporate fashion environment for the purpose of marketing and, in a sense, tokenizing fashion that wasn't even necessarily made for a specific demographic, but certainly made by one. And then the main point from Fujiwara that I'm going to focus on is how he believes that it evened the playing field for everyone. And also he said that it was a regional phenomenon and that the Godfather label is all hype, which is 100% true. And these are just going to be the main conclusions of the research that I collected and where all the dots connect. So these brands mentioned weren't terrible quality, poorly designed, and some of them were insanely expensive, but since they fall into streetwear, they're automatically undervalued by the fashion system and everyone who holds its ideologies. Ultimately, when luxury does streetwear, it will always be a bit off. While streetwear can be extremely casual genre of fashion, it has a distinct purpose, look, and consumer, but that is determined by the time period and region. While the word may have appeared in the late 20th century, clothing for those who are a part of countercultures has existed since establishment has. In other cases, there is also the point of making clothing for groups when no one else is that is accessible and well made. It may cater to a range of body types and or specific lifestyles without compromising the wearer's sense of self. What I didn't mention is that Willi Smith was called the king of sportswear according to the Willi Smith archive. His designs were heavily inspired by youth culture and countercultures and those who were a part of them. The subcultures that streetwear pulls from has a lot to do with its overall invalidity in fashion. Hip-hop, punk, skate, club culture, countercultures as a whole is something fashion can only take from. It rarely ever returns as much as it takes. Nobu was basically saying that he was remixing the fashion from kind of like more established non-fashion related sources and bringing that to people so that they can wear it for an everyday look, and saying that he was the first one to do it, but then Jean-Paul Gaultier eventually ended up doing it. So eventually it just got popular, and that was happening even before him, because that is why I mentioned the zoot suit. You could consider that streetwear as well. It catered to people, again, not inside the fashion system, who were very much a part of street countercultures, youth culture. Whether that be the Harlem youth in the 30s and 40s during the jazz craze, or the Zazus in France during World War II who rebelled against Nazi occupation's clothing rations by wearing oversized suits and wearing their hair long. Similarly to the zoot suit and jazz, the shirt kings were bringing customized airbrush clothing in Jamaica, Queens through the vehicle of hip-hop. Taking the trickle-up aspect of streetwear brands regarding the fashion system, these aren't explicitly streetwear per se, but the source that streetwear and other types of fashion brands would take from. An example is adults, entire communities who've been wearing Timbs since childhood and don't ask what's the new boot of the season, versus the companies and consumers who aren't part of these communities, who just hop from what's next to next and nothing has any real personal significance to them. Limited way that people view it now is because of how it was categorized by fashion itself. The result of that is items that are less inspired and generally just resulting in overproduction. There are too many brands and not enough designers who are actually solving problems and filling wardrobe gaps. When it comes to brands claiming themselves as streetwear, along with luxury taking so much from streetwear, it has come to a head with the reckoning that fashion is having right now. And the vehicle of that reckoning, and regarding the homogenization of fashion, the main vehicle of that was streetwear, trying to hop on this wave of hip-hop, of I can't even think of another subculture that's even as popular as hip-hop is right now. The no-clothes era of the 70s that I mentioned earlier is happening now through that homogenization via streetwear. A 180 to the prototype of streetwear that was Willi wear, that wasn't male dominant or could be considered inherently masculine, because a lot more women who specifically were wearing that kind of streetwear wanting to dress more feminine, but that doesn't mean that you're not wearing streetwear. What it looks like based off of simply what they're wearing is that, I'm not going to say they're wearing baby fat, but it really just does look like the more feminized versions of those items, along with less sportswear, and not the complete elimination of an entire genre. Moving forward, let's keep in mind that the term streetwear itself, regarding the way we use it today, was created to describe what is known as trickle-up fashion. Subcultures aren't dead. When determining what streetwear is and isn't, who the clothes are made for, and how those communities preserve and promote subcultures and countercultures, if at all, matters just as much, if not more, than what the clothing looks like. I will leave you with this excerpt from the Royal Designers for Industry, A Century of Fashion from 1989 on street fashion. Since the decline of haute couture, we have seen the rise of power of great ready-to-wear operations in France, Italy, and indeed Germany, but in spite of the making and selling of excellent clothes, there has been no one moment and no one designer who has made the impact that the haute couturiers did. For now, the general public, especially the young, do their own thing. Okay, I hope that you got your clothes folded, your dishes done with this long video. And let me know what you think of what is happening in fashion regarding streetwear. Let me know what you think about the future of streetwear, where you think it's going. And I have to edit this, so